the people who got kicked out of Hollywood, surely they were.
Who were kicked out?
Well, the people.
Wait a minute. Tell me who was kicked out.
Well, the people who left Hollywood. I mean, let's take for an example, Carl Foreman.
Yeah, Carl Foreman.
I mean,
Although he was celebrated as an undeniable icon of Hollywood, John Wayne was also one of the most divisive and controversial figures in the history of American cinema. Many people carried a deep resentment toward John Wayne. Some bluntly called him a disgusting relic of a rotten era. One actor hated him down to the bone, considering him a lifelong nemesis and an enemy he could never reconcile with. There was even another Hollywood legend who despised Wayne so much that he swore never to appear in the same frame with him. What was it that made John Wayne so widely hated? And in the face of such animosity, how did he respond? On to one, Paul Newman, the anti-hero, John Wayne tried every way to undermine. The very first name on the list of those who harbored resentment toward John Wayne was none other than the Hollywood legend, Paul Newman, rising to prominence in the 1950s. Paul Newman crafted a style that was utterly distinct from the muscular cowboy archetype that dominated the screen at the time. He gravitated toward roles that were layered and complex, characters who carried vulnerability and fragility, yet at the same time radiated remarkable resilience. Newman once candidly admitted, "I'm not interested in playing flawless heroes. I like characters with cracks, because it is through those cracks that the light can shine in." It was precisely this artistic choice that led John Wayne to regard Newman as an anti-hero. Wayne once mocked him, saying, "Paul Newman would stand out a lot more if he stopped trying to play the anti-hero, exposing himself with those muddy feet." In Wayne's eyes, Newman represented a genuine threat, because the roles he chose no longer embodied the traditional image of the American man, and even worse, they contributed to weakening the belief in the cowboy ideal. Beyond that, Wayne privately believed that Newman was far too refined, lacking the physical toughness and ruggedness necessary to share the screen with him, and that perception only widened the distance between Wayne and the kind of characters Newman chose to portray. But their conflict did not stop at art alone. Newman was an outspoken progressive activist, so much so that President Richard Nixon once placed him on his infamous enemies list because of his donations to and advocacy for anti-war organizations. In stark contrast, Wayne was a staunch conservative, a man who fiercely opposed liberal ideals in public. When asked about Wayne, Newman replied coldly and succinctly, "I have no interest in working with a reactionary." The tension eventually reached its peak when Wayne openly mocked Newman and other younger actors, accusing them of lacking genuine American spirit. Newman fired back without hesitation, labeling Wayne a disgrace to American cinema. And yet, what makes this feud particularly intriguing is that it largely unfolded in silence, without erupting into noisy public confrontations. Newman rarely mentioned Wayne's name, and Wayne never once extended an invitation for Newman to star in any of his films. Even when attending the same events, the two men all but avoided speaking to one another. If Paul Newman chose silence as his way of expressing contempt, the next figure on this list made his stance known far more openly, and with much sharper hostility. Number 2, Lee Van Cleef. Wherever John Wayne was, there would absolutely be no Van Cleef. Among the list of people who held resentment toward John Wayne, Lee Van Cleef deserves to be remembered as the man who hated Wayne the most in Hollywood history. Their relationship was steeped in tension and hostility, lasting long enough to be spoken of as a backstage legend. Van Cleef despised John Wayne to the core. In his eyes, Wayne was nothing more than a braggart, arrogant and domineering, always demanding to be the center of attention. On set, Wayne had no need for a director, for he himself was the one giving orders. At Hollywood gatherings, he entered like a king, clapping one man on the shoulder, signaling another with a nod, laughing boisterously as though the entire event were a scene in a film directed by him. Van Cleef was the complete opposite, cold, disciplined, and sparing with words. He loathed noisy men who leaned on the label of legend to overpower others. A mutual friend once bluntly remarked, "Wherever John Wayne appeared, you could be sure Lee Van Cleef would not be there." At parties behind the scenes, Wayne often pushed into the middle of the crowd, his booming voice drowning out everyone else, as though he had a private microphone. By contrast, Van Cleef sat silently in a corner, his piercing gaze taking everything in, yet, according to a friend, the moment Wayne began to speak, Van Cleef would rise immediately and walk out. The contempt only deepened when Wayne publicly belittled Van Cleef, dismissing him as nothing more than a B-list actor, good at playing villains, but lacking the charisma to ever become a leading man. To Wayne, Van Cleef was destined to remain a shadow in the background. But Van Cleef believed Wayne's fame was merely the product of an era that rewarded loud voices, not real acting ability. He once told a director flat out, "If I'd been born earlier, I would have made him fade into obscurity." Their conflict also stemmed from a stark difference in acting styles. Van Cleef immersed himself in his characters, carefully constructing morally complex figures, which he regarded as the essence of true artistry. Wayne, meanwhile, built his career on repetition, the same stoic, rugged cowboy in nearly every film. To Van Cleef, this approach was shallow and superficial, relying on image rather than cultivating true performance, proof, in his eyes, of Wayne's arrogance and complacency. What emerged was a battle for dominance within the Western genre. John Wayne embodied the old-school tradition of clear-cut heroes and villains, while Van Cleef came to symbolize the spaghetti Western, where characters were morally ambiguous and layered with inner conflict. And yet, if Van Cleef's feud with Wayne remained largely silent, confined within the realm of artistry, the next man in line chose a path of opposition that was far sharper and far more dangerous. Number 3. Marlon Brando, the microphone grab and the most violent moment in Oscar history. "Everything John Wayne stood for was exactly what I opposed," Marlon Brando once declared bluntly. Between John Wayne and Marlon Brando, there was never any semblance of friendship. They stood on two opposing fronts, divided not only by their art, but also by their beliefs. At the 1973 Academy Awards, Brando refused to accept the Oscar for Best Actor for his role as Vito Corleone in The Godfather, in protest of Hollywood's mistreatment of Native Americans. Instead of appearing himself, he sent Sachin Littlefeather, a Native American activist, to the stage to deliver a short statement on his behalf. Dressed in traditional Apache attire, Sachin walked onto the stage and was met with warm applause from the audience. But moments later, an incident no one expected erupted. Backstage, John Wayne flew into such a rage that it reportedly took 6 security guards to restrain him. He charged toward the stage, nearly snatched the microphone from Sachin's hands, and almost shoved her aside. The moment was so shocking that Sachin would later describe it as the most violent moment in the history of the Oscars. Wayne was even heard snapping harshly, "If Brando has something to say, he should get up here and say it himself. Don't bring some unknown girl in native garb up here as a stunt." So, what fueled the hostility between the two men? At its core, it was an ideological clash. Brando had openly denounced Wayne as a reactionary, branding him an outdated relic of a racially prejudiced America on The Dick Cavett Show. Brando remarked without hesitation, "We like to imagine ourselves the way John Wayne saw us," implying that Wayne's persona symbolized an America steeped in prejudice and rigid views on race and gender. The divide also lay in their acting philosophies. Brando, renowned for his immersive, free-form method acting, consistently broke the old Hollywood conventions. Wayne, however, dismissed such techniques as exaggerated, weak, and unmanly, viewing Brando as nothing more than an emblem of the liberal progressivism he despised. It was precisely these deep cultural, artistic, and ideological differences that made it impossible for the two to share the same stage. There were no public shouting matches or direct insults, but the underlying enmity ran so deep that they would never work together. According to many accounts, Brando even turned down numerous scripts simply because he refused to appear in the same film as John Wayne. And if Brando was merely a quiet irritation festering in Wayne's heart, the next figure on this list was someone Wayne openly sought to retaliate against. Number 4. Kirk Douglas, the deliberate late arrival and the calculated battle of height. I respect Wayne's talent, but I absolutely cannot accept his ideology, Kirk Douglas once bluntly admitted in an interview, although they never hated each other to the point of lifelong enmity. Their clashing views were more than enough to turn Kirk Douglas and John Wayne into a pair of actors who were cordial on the surface but never truly friendly, forced to cooperate solely for professional reasons. The two men starred together in 3 major films, but let no one mistake that for harmony, because every time they shared the same frame, it was yet another moment when suppressed tension hovered in the air, threatening to erupt at any second. The conflict reached its peak on the set of The War Wagon. That day, as usual, John Wayne arrived early and right on time, embodying the disciplined cowboy persona he took such pride in. Douglas, on the other hand, showed up nearly an hour late, clad in a wrinkled suit and beaming with excitement after returning from a fundraising event for a Democratic candidate. Wayne's anger was immediate and unmistakable, yet the very next day, Wayne retaliated by deliberately arriving late himself, this time because he had just attended a Republican gathering. This was no coincidence, but a calculated act of revenge. By intentionally keeping Douglas waiting, Wayne was delivering a pointed message. Their hostility went far beyond matters of acting. evolving into an unspoken political duel. Everyone on set understood one thing clearly. It was best not to let the two men share a meal, for fear that sparks could ignite into a full-blown fight. From that incident onward, every exchange between them became stiff and measured, with each word chosen carefully. One assistant director recalled, "If Wayne said good morning, Douglas would only nod. And if Douglas smiled at someone, Wayne would immediately look the other way." Wayne's contempt also surfaced in his remarks about Douglas's acting. He once dismissed Douglas's performance in Lust for Life, labeling it a weak choice. A crew member even recalled Wayne sneering, "He screams and bellows as if the audience were sitting 300 yards away." The rivalry did not stop there. Wayne's physical advantage, he was nearly 4 inches taller than Douglas, became yet another weapon to dominate his co-star. During close-up shots, directors had to place Douglas on a wooden box to balance the frame. But Wayne, with a sly smirk, would often step slightly closer to the camera, making Douglas appear noticeably smaller on screen. A crew witness later remarked, "They didn't exchange a single harsh word, but Kirk's glare in that moment could have set the film reel on fire." The level of tension between the two grew so severe that they limited themselves to the bare minimum of politeness during dinners, carefully avoiding political discussions in order to maintain a thin veneer of professionalism on set. However, while Kirk Douglas still managed to suppress his resentment and maintain his professionalism, the next actor on the list despised John Wayne so deeply that he came dangerously close to abandoning his role altogether. 5. Montgomery Clift, the weak kid who drove John Wayne to fury on set. Red River, 1948, was expected to be the perfect handshake between two generations of leading men. On one side, John Wayne, the indomitable symbol of American masculinity, and on the other, Montgomery Clift, a rising star with a style of acting that leaned toward emotional depth and psychological nuance. Yet from the very first days of filming, the relationship between the two quickly fractured beyond repair. John Wayne never had any fondness for Montgomery Clift, though not because of the younger actor's talent. What truly irritated Wayne was the idea that someone so fragile and delicate like Clift would dare step into the rugged world of cowboys, a world Wayne believed demanded toughness, resilience, and a strong, commanding presence. Clift's sorrowful eyes and boyish, almost scholarly frame only deepened Wayne's disdain. At one point, Wayne even spat out the words "arrogant little bastard" after watching the younger actor prepare for a scene using method acting techniques. To Wayne, Clift would never possess the kind of strength needed to embody a true cowboy, nor could he ever stand on equal ground with him. He saw Clift as an outsider who belonged to a different world altogether, a place where men were quiet, overly sensitive, and fragile, as if they might shatter with a single touch. Montgomery Clift, for his part, made no attempt to conceal his own contempt for Wayne. He considered him arrogant, a man who placed himself at the center of everything, dominating not only the screen, but also the lives of those around him off camera. As one crew member recalled Clift saying, "He doesn't act, he commands." The presence of Walter Brennan, a close ally of Wayne's, only served to deepen Clift's sense of isolation. Brennan openly disliked Clift, and Clift in turn had no affection for Brennan, creating a tension so palpable on set that even the smallest gesture could spark conflict. In later years, Clift reportedly refused to work alongside Dean Martin, fearing that Wayne and Brennan might somehow insert themselves into the production. Despite working together for months, Wayne and Clift spoke little to each other outside of filming. A crew member remembered, during breaks, Wayne sat with his own group, while Clift wandered off alone. At lunch, during pauses, or while sets were being changed, the two men would silently pass by one another, cold and distant, as if they were complete strangers. Rumors even circulated that Clift considered quitting the project halfway through, unable to endure the patriarchal, suffocating atmosphere and the heavy pressure radiating from Wayne. But Red River was his first major film role, and Clift understood perfectly well that if he delivered a strong performance, it would place him firmly on Hollywood's map. Still, the tension never dissipated. When Howard Hawks staged the wrestling scene in Red River, Wayne reportedly laughed mockingly at the idea of having to grapple with such a small and seemingly insignificant opponent. That derision ignited Clift's fury. He entered the scene with an intensity unlike anything he had shown before, pouring raw emotion into every movement until it became less a performance than a genuine struggle. Hawks himself later admitted that Wayne recognized Clift's genuine acting ability, but he remained convinced that his own star power and status would be enough to crush the younger actor. And while Montgomery Clift endured in silence to complete the role, the next name on the list hated John Wayne in a far more polite manner. And it was precisely that kind of politeness that managed to enrage Wayne more than any open attack ever could. Number 6. Gene Hackman, when Wayne flat out called him the worst in town. Among all the names tied to conflicts with John Wayne, the one he despised most bitterly was none other than Gene Hackman. Hackman was one of the most remarkable and versatile actors Hollywood had ever produced, renowned for a style of acting that was raw, powerful, and deeply rooted in emotional truth. Over a career spanning more than 4 decades, he won 2 Oscars, 4 Golden Globes, and 2 BAFTAs, indisputable evidence of his stature and excellence. It was widely known that Gene Hackman harbored no fondness for Wayne, yet unlike his blunt, abrasive rival, Hackman was known for his composure and courtesy. In a 1992 interview, he once remarked about Wayne, "He was one of the greatest actors who ever lived. I could never be like him, because our politics were completely incompatible. But you had to respect the way he commanded every scene and the sheer, overwhelming energy he brought to the screen." Hackman embodied the archetype of the anti-hero generation, actors who didn't need polished good looks or glamorous exteriors to captivate audiences, but instead relied on weighty emotions and psychological depth. He lacked the classic matinee idol handsomeness, yet his rugged masculinity and unflinching authenticity in performance made him magnetic. A former Marine, Hackman carried with him an air of discipline, a private lifestyle, and a reputation for steering clear of Hollywood's endless scandals. And that very contrast drove John Wayne into a rage. In John Wayne, My Father, Wayne's daughter Asa revealed that her father rarely spoke harshly of anyone with genuine malice, but Gene Hackman was the exception. According to Asa, whenever Hackman appeared on screen, Wayne would explode in criticism. My father called him the worst in town, disgusting. Wayne never offered a concrete explanation for why his hatred of Hackman ran so deep, yet Asa emphasized that his hostility went far beyond ordinary professional rivalry. No matter how successful Gene Hackman became, my father still admired other actors far more than he ever respected him. Perhaps Wayne's venom toward Hackman was really a reflection of his own buried insecurities in the face of a shifting Hollywood, an industry where the traditional cowboy archetype he personified was slowly being replaced by morally ambiguous, rougher, and more complex characters. And yet, while Wayne never hesitated to hurl venomous words at others, did he ever stop to wonder just how many eyes were fixed on him with quiet contempt? And perhaps what infuriated people most was not merely his beliefs or his dominance, but the way he lived so casually amid that undercurrent of hostility, as though none of it mattered in the slightest. Number 7. Frank Sinatra, when the voice and tutu could never coexist. If John Wayne was the symbol of conservative America, then Frank Sinatra embodied freedom, modernity, and defiance. 2 men, 2 entirely different worlds, and between them existed nothing but a simmering hostility that lasted until the very end of their lives. Sinatra, with his sophisticated style and mesmerizing voice, was one of Hollywood's most versatile stars, singing, acting, and making his mark as a figure closely tied to progressive politics. In stark contrast, Wayne saw Sinatra as nothing less than a destroyer of the traditional America he devoted himself to defending. People recalled that on a film set, just hearing Sinatra's name was enough to make Wayne scowl. Wayne once sneered that Sinatra was a weak little crooner who could never be a real man. To him, Sinatra was far too soft, lacking the grit of a cowboy, and nowhere near strong enough to stand alongside the classic leading men of Hollywood's golden age. But Sinatra was never one to stay silent. He regarded Wayne as nothing more than a conservative relic, and he openly told friends, "I'd never waste my time making a movie with that guy. Let him keep playing the same boring cowboy role over and over, while I live in the real world." Their feud only deepened when politics entered the picture. Sinatra publicly supported John F. Kennedy and liberal movements, while Wayne was the face of the far-right conservative camp. A director once revealed, if Sinatra walked into a party, Wayne would immediately stand up and leave, and if Wayne showed up, Sinatra would do the same. There were no microphone-grabbing scandals or screaming matches between them, but the mutual contempt was enough to ensure they would never work together. Throughout their legendary careers, they never once shared a single frame on screen. To Wayne, Sinatra stood as a symbol of moral decay. To Sinatra, Wayne was nothing more than an outdated figure who deserved to be left behind. 8. Clint Eastwood, the new generation challenger. If John Wayne was the undeniable symbol of the classic cowboy era, then Clint Eastwood emerged in the 1960s as a new wind, bringing a completely different image. Eastwood stepped out of Sergio Leone's spaghetti westerns, cold, laconic, the anti-hero figure with narrowed eyes beneath a wide-brimmed hat, ruthless yet enigmatic. Wayne considered this an insult to the cowboy spirit he had spent decades building. In his eyes, Clint Eastwood was the man tearing it down, dragging the Western genre into the mud with its moral ambiguity and lack of clear justice. Wayne once flatly rejected an invitation to appear in High Plains Drifter, stating, "His movies are nothing but darkness and violence. They betray the spirit of the American West." And Eastwood? He never bothered to hide his disdain for Wayne. In one interview, Eastwood hinted, "Hollywood keeps shoving those clean-cut, indestructible heroes down our throats, but in real life, people are far more complicated." That statement landed like a direct punch at the very image Wayne embodied. Their conflict was never shouted out loud, but it was obvious enough for the two men to avoid each other throughout their careers. Wayne remained the final face of the old-school Western, while Eastwood became the emblem of a new generation, realistic, cold, and uncompromising. Their paths would never cross. Match 9. James Dean. The rebel icon Wayne could never accept. James Dean only managed to leave behind 3 films before his untimely death. Yet that was enough to turn him into an immortal legend. In Rebel Without a Cause, East of Eden, and Giant, Dean embodied the image of a rebellious youth, fragile yet explosive, something John Wayne considered a disgrace to the traditional masculine ideal. Wayne once sneered, "A slick-haired kid frowning at the camera. Is this what Hollywood now celebrates as a man?" To him, Dean was far too weak, far too feminine, unworthy of standing alongside the tough, hard-as-nails cowboys he himself represented. Dean, for his part, had no respect for Wayne. To him, Wayne was nothing more than an old relic, trapped in decaying molds of the past. Legend has it that when asked if he would ever want to work with Wayne, Dean laughed. "I'd rather drive myself to death at high speed than ever share a set with that guy." Had James Dean lived longer, perhaps their clash would have grown even more intense. But even within Dean's short life, the gulf in ideals between the young rebel and the cowboy king was already wide enough to make them two poles that could never meet. Did John Wayne ever realize that he was hated? The answer is yes. John Wayne was fully aware that many of his colleagues in Hollywood disliked him, but that never seemed to bother him. In fact, at times he even appeared proud of it. He once declared bluntly, "I'm not here to be loved. I'm here to say what's right, even if it drives people crazy." And those were not the words of a politician, but of John Wayne, the man in cowboy boots who became an immortal symbol of traditional America, yet at the same time was mercilessly cast aside by modern Hollywood. Wayne was no naive figure in the film industry. He was a staunch conservative, devoted to ideals of anti-communism, support for the military, and upholding a white America. And he never tried to hide it. He once stated plainly, "I love America, and I hate communism. I love freedom, and I despise dependency." His convictions went beyond rhetoric. Wayne served as president of the Motion Picture Alliance for the Preservation of American Ideals, openly supporting HUAC investigations and participating in the purge of artists suspected of communist ties. He even starred in Big Jim McLean, portraying a HUAC investigator, treating the role as a direct declaration of his anti-communist stance. In his notorious 1971 interview with Playboy, Wayne proclaimed, "I believe in white supremacy until the blacks are educated to the point of responsibility. And I don't feel guilty about the fact that America took this great country away from the Native Americans. That was simply a matter of survival." These remarks immediately caused actors, directors, and producers of the era to turn their backs on him. Yet Wayne never apologized, never retracted, never attempted to soften his words. For Wayne, liberal outrage was a sign of victory, proof, in his mind, that he had remained loyal to his ideals while others merely chased after trends. He often mocked colleagues who supported civil rights or the anti-war movement, and by the late 1960s, as Hollywood began moving more decisively toward liberalism, many younger directors and rising stars stopped offering him roles. Branded outdated, conservative, and unpleasant, Wayne refused to change, instead doubling down on his beliefs. In his final years, he admitted to a friend, "I don't have a place in Hollywood anymore, but I don't need anything from them." Yet Hollywood's cold shoulder was not the only pain Wayne endured. His greatest battle was with cancer, a slow, drawn-out tragedy. Diagnosed with lung cancer in 1964, he underwent surgery to remove a lung and several ribs. By 1979, the disease had returned, this time spreading to his small intestine, leaving him gravely weakened. By late May, he was back in the hospital, his strength rapidly declining. On June 9 or 10, he slipped into a coma, never regaining consciousness, and died on June 11, 1979, at UCLA Medical Center in Los Angeles, at the age of 72. His son was by his side at the hospital bed when he took his final breath. Though one of Hollywood's most famous faces, John Wayne's last days were marked by isolation and quiet. In his hospital room, only a handful of relatives stayed close. Few friends came to visit, partly because he wished it so, partly because many had long since abandoned him. He forbade cameras, not wanting the world to see his frail body. A close friend recalled, "He was no longer the Duke, just a thin old man lying still, but his eyes still shone with defiance." His funeral was held at Our Lady of the Angels, and he was laid to rest at Pacific View Memorial Park, California. Immediately afterward, Hollywood and the nation erupted in tributes. President Jimmy Carter declared, "He was part of America's history, a man of ideals who lived by what he believed." National television stations altered their schedules to rebroadcast classics like The Searchers, True Grit, and The Alamo. Variety, The New York Times, and Los Angeles Times all ran front-page obituaries, hailing him as the man who carried the image of America across a century. But almost as soon as the mourning ended, controversy reignited. Should John Wayne truly be remembered as an American hero when he had made openly racist remarks, opposed women's rights, and disparaged people of color? Critics revisited his Playboy interview of 1971, highlighting once more his infamous statement, "I believe in white supremacy until the blacks are better educated." Numerous articles raised the question, are we honoring a legend or glorifying a relic of outdated conservative America? In 2019, students at the USC School of Cinematic Arts, SCA, staged a protest against an exhibition honoring Wayne. Their signs read, "SCA must take down the John Wayne exhibit. Wayne was an unapologetic racist. By maintaining his legacy, SCA is endorsing white supremacy." Initially, the school attempted to modify the display, but by July 2020, under mounting public pressure, the exhibit was moved into the library for research purposes only, no longer open to public view. That same year, the backlash intensified nationwide. In June 2020, the Orange County Democratic Party passed an emergency resolution demanding that John Wayne Airport be renamed, while also calling for the removal of his statue and all associated imagery. These events demonstrated that John Wayne's legacy had moved far beyond cinema. It had become a deeply divisive political and social issue. His past statements about black people and Native Americans were widely regarded as undeniable evidence of racial prejudice. And if this story resonates with you, don't hesitate to leave a comment below. Hit like, share this video, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss any of the truths behind the glittering facade.